After discussing the 100 Years' War between England and France, let us turn our attention back to England's internal affairs during this period. After the start of the 100 Years' War, Edward III established the Order of the Garter and the Garter Knight system to enhance the combat effectiveness of soldiers and unite various factions. The chivalric order formed by Edward III adopted the Garter as its symbol, which later became the highest honor and title of distinction in England, unlike the renowned continental European orders of the time, such as the Teutonic Knights, the Knights Templar, or the Knights Hospitaller. The Garter Knights were the first secular chivalric order, formed to protect the nation. Whereas the other orders were dedicated to safeguarding religious faith, Edward III's establishment of this honorary system achieved a triple aim. First, it allowed him to attract domestic nobles by conferring honors and binding them with the chivalric spirit. Second, when seeking foreign supporters, he could grant this honorary medal when knighthood was deemed unsuitable. And third, it served to reward soldiers for their military contributions and boost morale. With the development of the chivalric order, Henry VIII of the Tudor dynasty issued a decree that ultimately solidified England's system of honors. From the Garter Medal to the Order of the Garter, England established a system of honors which, together with the system of peerage, formed the structure of the English nobility. From 1348 to 1350, the Black Death spread widely across England, bringing devastating disaster to its people. The labor force was drastically reduced. But to protect the interests of the landowning nobility, England issued laws prohibiting wage increases for peasants. At the same time, the 100 Years' War between England and France was underway. In the early stages, England achieved significant victories, looting large sums of wealth and bringing it back home, which led to a rise in domestic prices. However, as the war became more challenging in later stages, the English monarch began increasing taxes to fund the military, leaving the peasants severely oppressed. In 1381, in southeastern England, Wat Tyler led the people in an uprising, somewhat akin to the Chen Shang and Wu Guang rebellion in China. Rebellions often face slim odds of success, and Wat Tyler's was no exception. They rallied under the slogan "Cleanse the Court," but ultimately brought about their own downfall. Following this, uprisings broke out across England. The English government organized troops to suppress the revolts on a large scale, with many rebel leaders ending up on the execution block. Nevertheless, this movement evolved into an uprising that swept across all of England, and became the largest peasant revolt in the country's history. Although Wat Tyler's rebellion failed, it marked the beginning of the end for the feudal serfdom system in England. During the 100 Years' War between England and France, some English nobles took the opportunity to expand their private armies and increase their power. Meanwhile, Henry VI of the House of Lancaster suffered successive defeats in the war against France, losing the substantial achievements his father had gained there. This gradually led to him losing the support of the English nobility. By 1455, a fierce struggle for the English throne erupted between the House of Lancaster and the House of York. Since the emblems of these two families were a red rose and a white rose, respectively, this conflict became known as the Wars of the Roses. Both families were royal relatives of the preceding Plantagenet dynasty, with the Lancasters having established their rule first. The two houses had long-standing tensions over power, and the fight for the throne led to decades of extreme conflict and bloody battles. Finally, in 1485, the Lancastrians emerged victorious. Henry VII of the House of Lancaster married Elizabeth of York, uniting the two houses, ending the dispute over the throne, and inaugurating the Tudor dynasty. The Wars of the Roses caused significant casualties among the nobility, clearing obstacles for the development and consolidation of the Tudor dynasty. England was poised to enter a peak era of highly centralized royal power. In the early 16th century, Martin Luther published his 95 Theses in Germany, questioning the corruption of the Catholic Church and accusing it of exploiting believers under the guise of divinity. This sparked the Reformation movement across Europe. However, England at the time did not follow the European trend, as King Henry VIII had his own plans. He sought to gain favor with the Catholic Church to secure their support and gain greater benefits for himself. The turning point came with Henry VIII's desire for a divorce. His wife, Catherine, was a princess of the Spanish royal family, but their marriage was heavily influenced by politics rather than mutual affection. Moreover, Catherine did not bear him a son, only a daughter. Henry VIII was eager to have a male heir to continue his reign. If his daughter inherited the throne and later married into a foreign royal family, it could make England vulnerable to annexation or control by other countries. Thus, Henry VIII considered these issues deeply and concluded that divorce was inevitable. However, Catherine was a devout Catholic with traditional values of supporting her husband and children. And she had a strong reputation. The Roman papacy, unwilling to offend her, rejected Henry VIII's request for a divorce. This infuriated Henry VIII, leading him to take bold action. In 1533, following the death of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Henry VIII bypassed the Roman papacy and directly appointed a new archbishop who approved his new marriage. This enraged the Pope, who excommunicated Henry VIII from the Church. In response, Henry VIII declared that the Church of England would be independent from the Roman papacy and henceforth would answer only to the king. He also pushed Parliament to pass the Act of Supremacy, formally establishing this change. Henry VIII's decisive actions not only secured his authority but also severed all ties with the Roman papacy. However, the Reformation was not achieved overnight. Henry VIII's reforms were relatively smooth due to the aftermath of the Wars of the Roses, which had eliminated a significant number of nobles, leaving the Church as the king's only significant rival. From Henry VIII's initiation of the Church of England's independence, the reform movement spanned 4 monarchs, marked by conflicts of interest and bloody oppression. In 1563, Elizabeth I approved the 39 articles drafted by Parliament, which defined the doctrines of the Church of England and established the Bible as the sole standard of faith. Undeniably, during this Reformation, Henry VIII solidified the English monarchy's absolute power. The Church of England broke away from the Roman papacy to become the national church, implementing religious reforms and marking England's transition from the medieval era to the modern age. While England was preoccupied with the Reformation and the monarchy consolidating power, Spain and Portugal had already opened new maritime routes, discovered the New World, and amassed immense wealth. When Elizabeth I ascended the throne, she realized that England had missed its golden opportunity, leaving her to seek other ways to gain benefits. In 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas, and Europeans began colonizing the region and establishing settlements. However, at the time, European immigrants were few, and the indigenous Native Americans were either decimated by diseases or massacred, causing their population to plummet. The colonies, in desperate need of labor, presented an opportunity for John Hawkins, who later served the British Crown, to find a new business venture, the highly profitable transatlantic slave trade. The Hawkins family had a history of overseas exploration, combining roles as merchants, navigators, and pirates, often resorting to looting for profit. In 1562, Hawkins undertook his first heinous slave trading expedition. This initial venture was purely personal. Hawkins, along with his crew and 3 ships, arrived on the African coast, capturing black Africans and filling the ships to capacity. He then transported them to Central America, exchanging them for a large amount of wealth and goods. This first venture into the slave trade brought Hawkins significant profits, which aroused envy among many Englishmen, including Queen Elizabeth I. Initially, Elizabeth I rejected the trade, as it was highly immoral and dishonorable. However, by the time she ascended the throne, Spain and Portugal had already secured significant advantages. Thus, she sought alternative ways to benefit, especially after Hawkins returned with ships full of gold and silver, presenting his treasures before her. The temptation was too great to resist. As a result, Hawkins' second slave trading voyage received the support of Queen Elizabeth I. While his first expedition was a private venture, the second became an official undertaking. Hawkins' vile slave trade turned him into a national hero in England, earning him a medal from Queen Elizabeth. From that point forward, England, along with many other European countries, embarked on the triangular trade, departing from Europe, capturing black Africans in Africa, and selling them in the Americas. This trade initiated a wave of transatlantic slave trafficking, leading to hundreds of years of blood and tears for black slaves. Even today, the legacy of this history persists, with racial discrimination remaining a deeply rooted issue in the United States. Since the 15th century, the European age of exploration began, with generation after generation of Europeans setting sail. The wondrous New World and its immense wealth attracted countless Europeans to venture out one after another. Spain and Portugal, as the pioneers of maritime exploration, had a firm grip on the New World. Other European nations could only resort to piracy to plunder and share in the riches of the New World. At that time, English pirates were the most notorious and active. And among them, Francis Drake stood out. Drake frequently plundered Spanish merchant ships in the Atlantic, causing great annoyance to the Spaniards, perhaps bored of lingering in the Atlantic. In 1577, Drake decided to undertake something new, exploring new colonies in the Pacific. He planned to follow Magellan's route to venture deeper into the ocean. However, Drake was somewhat skeptical of Magellan's route. In the end, he inadvertently accomplished a remarkable feat, circumnavigating the globe. During this journey, Drake didn't abandon his pirate profession, raiding wherever he went. Coincidentally, he stumbled upon Spanish outposts and merchant ships along the way, seizing a massive haul of spoils. Furthermore, south of the Strait of Magellan, Drake discovered a broader maritime route. Consequently, the strait between the Americas and Antarctica was later named after him, the Drake Passage. In the autumn of 1580, Drake completed his circumnavigation and returned to England, bringing back a vast amount of gold, silver, treasures, and spices. Queen Elizabeth was delighted and knighted him. Drake subsequently joined the English Navy, initiating significant naval reforms that laid the foundation for England's maritime dominance in the future. It can be said that it was the pirates who led England, initially missing out on the Age of Discovery, to set forth and conquer the seas. England's pirate activities had pushed Spain to its limits, sowing the seeds for a later naval war. In 1587, Elizabeth I executed Mary, Queen of Scots, to prevent Catholics from seizing the opportunity to incite rebellion. Mary was a devout Catholic and had a legitimate claim to the English throne. Her execution provided Catholic Spain with a pretext to declare war on England. In reality, England's rampant piracy had long infuriated Spain. Now, they felt it was time to put an end to this threat. In 1588, a great naval war broke out between England and Spain. At that time, Spain's invincible armada was truly an unmatched force across Europe. At the start of the war, Spain planned to unite its naval and land forces to launch a cross-sea attack and land on English soil. However, England proved to be no pushover. Before the war began, Elizabeth I dispatched Francis Drake to the front lines. Drake, known as Spain's Nightmare, joined forces with his cousin, John Hawkins, who had held senior positions in the English Navy for decades, leading a major reform of England's naval forces. Yes, this was the same Hawkins who had initiated the infamous triangular slave trade mentioned earlier. Both men were former pirates, rich in maritime combat experience, and well versed in the strengths and weaknesses of Spanish ships. More importantly, the winds at sea worked greatly in England's favor. In the first battle, much like the strategy employed in the Battle of Red Cliffs, Drake used fire ships to attack the Spanish armada. He then seized the opportunity to launch a large-scale blockade and pursuit, inflicting heavy losses on Spain's invincible armada. Ultimately, England emerged victorious in the naval battle. After the Great Naval Battle of 1588, the English Navy launched several expeditions against Spain, though with limited success. Despite the Armada's devastating loss in the battle, Spain still maintained a strong naval presence. The conflicts between the two nations continued until James I ascended the throne and the two sides signed a peace treaty. However, it is undeniable that the naval battle of 1588 created a crack in Spain's maritime dominance and marked the first step for England in establishing its own naval supremacy. Starting in 1595, the Dutch established multiple trade companies in the East Indies, which were later merged to form the Dutch East India Company. This company monopolized vast trade routes and international commerce, amassing immense wealth and sparking envy across Europe. Many European nations sought to emulate this success. including England. In 1600, the English East India Company was granted a royal charter by Queen Elizabeth I, giving it trade monopoly rights. By 1601, English nobles recommended the pirate James Lancaster to lead an expedition to the East Indies for overseas colonial trade. Lancaster had previously served under Francis Drake. Why did England choose a pirate to lead these expeditions? This decision was deliberate, as pirates at that time in England possessed both power and expertise. They were skilled in combat and navigation, adept at trade, and accustomed to hardship. However, at that time, colonial trade in India and Southeast Asia was already dominated by Portugal and the Netherlands. England had to contend with both to establish a foothold in these regions. In 1612, the English East India Company defeated the Portuguese in India and gained favour with the Indian royal courts. Capitalizing on this opportunity, England rapidly expanded its influence, establishing colonies and monopolizing trade in the East Indies. Throughout the 17th and 18th centuries, England and the Netherlands engaged in multiple wars over control of maritime trade. After gaining independence from the Spanish Empire, the Netherlands leveraged its strategic geographical position to develop maritime trade aggressively. By the latter half of the 17th century, the Dutch had established the world's most prominent merchant fleet. While expanding their overseas colonies, they also monopolized global maritime trade, earning the nickname the Carriers of the Sea. To compete for maritime dominance, England enacted the Navigation Acts to restrict Dutch trade. In 1652, the First Anglo-Dutch War broke out. Over the next century, the two nations engaged in intermittent conflicts. Eventually, the Netherlands was defeated and withdrew from the competition for maritime supremacy. England's Navigation Acts, originally intended to protect domestic industries, also restricted trade between its overseas colonies and other nations, indirectly triggering the American War of Independence. The establishment and growth of the English East India Company allowed England to control nearly half of global maritime trade. Victory in the Anglo-Dutch Wars ushered in an era of maritime dominance for England, laying a solid foundation for expanding its colonies and building the British Empire, the empire on which the sun never sets.